I know what you're thinking. You don't just love true crime. You also love witchcraft, vampire cults, catfishing, and lunatics in courtrooms. Where's the video for you? Well, here it is. This is the story that has it all. The murder of Sydney Loof. Sydney was born in 1993 in Nebraska. She was a tomboy growing up and she loved to hike and fish. She was known in her community as an animal lover and as a person who cared more about looking after others than herself. After high school, Sydney took a job at a home improvement store, Menards. She also began looking for love. She created a profile on Tinder and waded into the world of online dating. Sydney was looking for a woman to date, and too much of the time she would match with women who turned out to be married or in a committed relationship to men. And Sydney, rather than being offered love or meaningful connection, was offered threesomes. Needless to say, it was extremely frustrating, but she continued to look for a romantic connection. But on November 11th, 2017, Sydney finally thought she had found someone. She matched with a 25-year-old brunette named Audrey, and the two began to chat about their mutual likes and dislikes. After a few days of talking, the two made a plan to meet up in real life. Wary because of her past experiences, Sydney checked with Audrey that this wouldn't be another sleazy setup. She asked, "Just going to be me and you, right?" Audrey replied, "Yes, of course, lol." On November 14th, 2017, Sydney and Audrey met up. They had made plans to go to dinner, but they ended up just driving around in Audrey's car, talking. When Audrey dropped her off at the end of the night, Sydney was on cloud 9. She sent a text to her friend Tara Garrick, which read, "Just got done chilling with this super cute girl. I hope she doesn't have a boyfriend." Before going to bed, Sydney got a message from Audrey that read, "Good night, gorgeous." The next day, Sydney worked the afternoon shift at Menards before getting ready for a second date with Audrey. She didn't seem to take note of this man who entered the store 4 minutes after her and made some purchases. That evening, Sydney got dressed up and ready for her date. She sent this photo to her mother and a few friends. It was the last time any of them would ever hear from her. The next morning, November 16th, Sydney was expected for her morning shift at Menards. She didn't show up, which raised serious flags for her coworkers. Sydney was known as a very conscientious and responsible person. If she wasn't showing up for work, it meant something was wrong. Sydney's friend Tara Garrick, also a coworker at Menards, contacted Sydney's mother with her concerns. Sydney's family immediately contacted the police and requested a welfare check at Sydney's apartment. When police arrived, they found her car in the driveway and her lights on. Inside the apartment were Sydney's eyeglasses, which she needed at night when she took her contact lenses out. She never stayed away from home without them. Worse, Sydney's cat Mimsy had an empty food and water bowl. Everyone knew that animal lover Sydney would never have purposely left her cat like that. Sydney Loof was officially declared missing. Over 27,000 people joined a Find Sydney Loof Facebook page, and flyers were distributed to spread the word and show people what Sydney looked like. Sydney's friend, Brooklyn McChrystal, came up with a genius idea to help the investigation. Knowing that Sydney had been on a Tinder date the night she went missing, Brooklyn made a fake Tinder profile, set her preference to women, and began swiping. The only thing that Brooklyn knew was that Sydney's date was named Audrey and that she had been about 32 miles from Sydney when the two connected. Brooklyn's bait worked. She connected with Audrey on Tinder, and after some chatting, Brooklyn managed to get a phone number for Audrey. When she contacted police with this information, they traced the number. But it didn't lead to anyone named Audrey. It led to a 23-year-old resident of Wilbur, Nebraska named Bailey Boswell. Bailey's apartment building in Wilbur also happened to be the last place that Sydney's cell phone had pinged the night of her disappearance. When police showed up at the Wilbur apartment, they found Bailey Boswell and her 51-year-old boyfriend, Aubrey Trail. When police asked Bailey and Aubrey's landlord about the couple, they were told that the pair were quiet and always paid their rent on time. Anything unusual happened in the apartment recently? The police asked. Why, yes, the landlord answered. On November 16th, the day of Sydney's final date, there had been an overwhelming smell of bleach coming from Bailey and Aubrey's apartment. The next day, police returned with a search warrant. When they entered the apartment, they were immediately hit with the smell of bleach. There was no sign of Sydney, and Bailey and Aubrey were gone. Bailey and Aubrey were announced as persons of interest in the case of Sydney Loof, and their faces were plastered across the country. Bizarrely, the couple responded by posting a video to the Find Sydney Loof Facebook page.
But we've spent the last few days watching ourselves being slammed and crucified in the newspapers and the news and everything else, so we thought it was time we had our say. We're not trying to defend anything. We're not trying to make you believe anything. We just feel we should get to say our side since everyone else gets to say theirs.
Aubrey spends about 6 minutes telling his audience that the media is too biased to be giving you the correct facts. Then Bailey describes what happened on the night Sydney disappeared.
I met her on a Tuesday. We drove around Lincoln, smoked weed, had a great time. We hit it off. I dropped her off at home, picked her up the next night at her house. We drove around, smoked weed again, made our way to my house where we smoked wax and shatter, and I gave her a 1/4 ounce of some really good weed. I went to take her home, and she asked me to drop her off at a friend's house, so I did so. I really don't even know what else to say. I've been seeing all this stuff on the news presses and the magazines and the news, and I guess I just want the family to know that I'm truly sorry and I didn't have anything to do with this, and I hope that Sydney is found very soon. She is a sweet, amazing girl.
In a world convinced that the news media is evil and that only individuals online speak the truth, it's actually pretty smart of them to promote their side of the story this way. Though it might have helped if they didn't look like they were about to go rob Kevin's house at Christmas time. The video you just saw goes on for a total of 9 minutes. That night, another video was posted, mostly reiterating the same ideas, also around 9 minutes in length. Because the second video was posted around midnight, police deduced that wherever Bailey and Aubrey were was probably where they would be for the rest of the night. Working with Facebook, they tracked the IP address where the video had originated. Investigators were led to the Windmill Inn located in Branson, Missouri. There was no physical evidence linking Aubrey and Bailey to Sydney's missing persons case, but the two were arrested on previous outstanding warrants. Meanwhile, in Nebraska, more than 50 police officers, members of the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers searched for Sydney, hoping to find her alive. On December 4th, 2017, police found something in Edgar, Nebraska, a small town about an hour west of Aubrey and Bailey's apartment. In a deserted, marshy area, they found a black garbage bag. Inside was a pair of human arms. The arms had Sydney's tattoos on them, including this heartbreaking one. The rest of Sydney's body was discovered strewn about the marsh. She had been cut into 14 pieces. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was likely strangulation and that she was almost certainly caught off guard and killed quickly. Much more disturbing is the fact that many of Sydney's organs, including her tongue and heart, were missing. Police turned their attention to Bailey and Aubrey. The couple had met when Bailey was 22 and Aubrey was 50 and started a crime spree that included forgery, fraud, and outright theft. The weirdest part was that they had met many women on Tinder before Sydney. They told these women that Aubrey was a vampire with the ability to fly, while Bailey was a queen witch who could help them unlock their hidden powers. 3 of these women, who remain anonymous, testified at Aubrey's trial. They said that Aubrey and Bailey often talked about wanting to murder a woman and tried to convince them to take part in a ritual killing. Aubrey offered to pay the women's rent and bills in exchange for their help in scams, as well as for services as sex slaves. The women were expected to be naked around the house when they were with Aubrey and Bailey. They had to call them Daddy and Mommy, and one of the women was given a pink collar to wear. All of the women were told that the only way to become witches and unlock their powers was to kill someone and take their last breath. The grooming worked enough that at least one of the women truly believed that Bailey was magic and could read her mind. Also, quick PSA, we know that people who sexually groom and take advantage of others usually target those who are desperate, have undergone trauma, or who are otherwise vulnerable. If you're ever in a situation where someone tells you he's a vampire king who can fly, we recommend leading him to the top of a tall building and asking him to prove it. Luckily, all the women who testified came to the realization that the situation was dangerous and they left Bailey and Aubrey's vampire witch cult. But that didn't stop Aubrey and Bailey from seeking new victims on Tinder. On the afternoon of November 16th, while Sydney had been at work, Aubrey and Bailey were caught on surveillance cameras buying a hacksaw, plastic drop cloths, and saw blades at their local Home Depot. Then they went to their local antique store to purchase a meat grinder and a folding saw. Afterwards, they drove to the Menards where Sydney was working. Aubrey walked into the store to check out their victim. Sydney hadn't met Aubrey at that point. Remember, her biggest fear while dating was finding out that her potential partners had boyfriends. In June of 2018, Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Train were charged with the murder of Sydney Loof. 1 year later, Aubrey's trial began.
How do you plead?
Not guilty to first-degree murder.
And about count 2?
I'm not guilty to disposing of human skeletal remains in Saline County.
All right, very good, sir.
Aubrey pled not guilty, claiming that he didn't deliberately kill Sydney. Her death was an accident that occurred during rough consensual sex. Obviously, this was a very different statement than the one he had posted on Facebook. Aubrey now said that Sydney took money in exchange for being part of a threesome and that he accidentally strangled her during their encounter. Given Sydney's frustration and annoyance whenever someone approached her about a three-way, this story seems unlikely. Also, the tools to murder and dismember Sydney were bought when she was still alive, so that's a pretty wacky coincidence. During the trial, an FBI agent testified that Aubrey Train had whispered in his ear during an interrogation, "Witches kill, a life for a life, and they gain more power when they kill." The trial took a dramatic turn when Aubrey, during witness testimony, called out,
Please be seated.
Bailey is innocent and I curse you all.
Stop recording.
The reason that everybody is rushing over to Aubrey during this video is that he had pulled out a razor blade and slashed his own throat 3 times. Aubrey did not die in court that day. He was rushed to the hospital and returned later with deep scars on his throat. He had missed a substantial amount of his own trial. It took a jury only 3 hours of deliberation before finding Aubrey Trail guilty of the murder of Sydney Loof. He is currently on death row. Bailey Boswell was also found guilty, and on November 8, 2021, she was sentenced to life in prison. At the time of this video, the dust has barely settled on Boswell's sentencing. Sydney Loof's family is left to grieve the loss of their beloved daughter, who is remembered to this day as a kind-hearted animal lover, a hard worker, and a good friend. pretty smart, right? You know some stuff about true crime. You know when things seem off. So riddle me this. A guy calls the police at 11:30 in the morning. He says that someone kidnapped his girlfriend in the middle of the night, but he's only getting around to calling you now. He claims a bunch of guys broke into his house and kidnapped her, but he can't tell you who or why. He says they have guns with lasers on them. When pressed, this guy admits that he and his girlfriend recently had a major fight about his involvement with other women, but he swears he never hurt her. It was one of the mysterious intruders. If you're rolling your eyes at the ceiling right now and thinking, okay, liar, you're thinking like a cop. And the cops in this case were terribly, horribly wrong. Aaron Quinn had just had a difficult and complicated breakup with his fiancée when he met a new woman, Denise Huskins. The two hit it off and began to date steadily, but when Aaron started mulling over whether or not to get back with his former fiancée, Denise discovered the text messages between the former lovers. She accused Aaron of cheating on her, though in reality he had only been texting his ex, and she told him that he had a choice to make. But on March 22, 2015, the two of them went to his home and hashed it out over pizza, eventually coming to the conclusion that they would commit to each other and work to reestablish trust. They went to bed together around midnight, having decided to make the relationship stick. At 3 a.m., intruders broke into the house. According to Denise and Aaron, there were at least two of them.
We said, I'm going to leave some ties at the edge of the bed. You're going to tie his hands behind his back and his feet together. And I was shaking, and he was encouraging me, saying, you're doing a good job.
The intruders covered Denise and Aaron's eyes with swimming goggles covered in duct tape, which blocked their sight. They then placed headphones on the victims with pre-recorded messages giving them further instructions. The recording called Aaron by name.
It became clear that this attack was not random.
One of the first things he said to me when they separated us was that he gave my parents' address where I grew up. He knew all my bank account records. This was stuff, so as it kept on going, you could tell that this was planned.
Strangely enough, the recording also referred to Aaron's former fiancée who had lived in the house with him until recently. Clearly, the advanced planning had called for a different woman in the house. Though when intruders found out that Denise was also an attractive blonde woman, they threw her in the trunk of their car anyway. Aaron was left in the home, but left in front of a video camera. He was told he was being watched and that he wasn't allowed to leave the video frame. Then his ankles were duct taped and the intruders gave him a phone. They told him that they would communicate with him via text and email, but that he wasn't to call the police.
Tells me I need to stay there till the morning. I have to call in sick to work, and they had given me Denise's passcode to her phone. I need to text her boss and tell him that she had a family emergency, was going to be gone for the week.
Aaron was also instructed to hold on to the phone and expect ransom demands. If Aaron disobeyed orders, the intruder said, Denise would be killed. Then the intruders forced Aaron to drink a sedative and he passed out. When Aaron awoke, it was because his alarm clock was blaring. He managed to stay awake long enough to call in sick to work as per his instructions. Then he passed out again. When Aaron woke up for a second time, it was 11:30 a.m. He had new text from the intruder demanding two payments of $8,500. Aaron responded to the kidnapper's message but didn't get a response. He began to panic. Perhaps he had been unconscious for too long and Denise was being hurt. Because he was under orders not to call the police and believed he was under video surveillance, Aaron called his brother, an FBI agent. His brother advised Aaron to immediately call the cops. Terrified that he was endangering Denise's life, he did so. When officers from the Vallejo Police Department arrived at Aaron's house, it had been more than 9 hours since Denise had been kidnapped. They quickly unplugged the camera, but were immediately suspicious of Aaron's outlandish story. First question that they asked him was whether he was on drugs, which is just rude in my opinion. I mean, I get it, but at least ask him if he wants the duct tape taken off his ankles first, maybe, or a glass of water, and then start accusing him of getting high. I mean, there's such a thing as manners, honestly. As getting established earlier, we have to be fair to the police and point out that Aaron Quinn's story did sound fishy as hell. It's exactly the sort of story that a psychopath would make up after killing his girlfriend and trying to cover his tracks. But Denise Huskins was missing, and the police were so convinced that Aaron was guilty that they didn't even try to find her. They just kept trying to convince Aaron to confess to her murder.
I'm telling you, it did not happen the way that you're describing it. It did not. Period.
I didn't hurt her. I didn't do any of that.
At one point, police gave Aaron a polygraph, which they told him he failed. Whether or not this is actually true is unclear. Police also accused Aaron of pushing Denise down the stairs and killing her.
At one point, I actually started doubting my own sanity. And I thought maybe I did have a schizophrenic breakdown.
One day after Denise had been kidnapped, and after police spent 18 hours interrogating Aaron, proof of life recording was sent to San Francisco Chronicle. Denise Huskins was alive and being held captive.
My name is Denise Huskins, and I'm kidnapped. Otherwise, crime.
Police were still skeptical, but they brought Aaron back to the station and told him to get in contact with the kidnappers. When Aaron was given back his cell phone, he realized the police had put it in airplane mode, even though they had been told it was the only link to the kidnappers. When the airplane mode was turned off, the phone was flooded with messages. The kidnappers had been trying to get in touch with Aaron and nobody had responded. Aaron was terrified that Denise had been killed in the meantime. Police still insisted that there were no kidnappers. One day later, Denise Huskin reappeared, dazed and physically battered. She was dumped out of a van 400 miles south of where she had been kidnapped onto the street of her childhood home. She made it to a phone and called the police, explaining that she had been abducted. At first, she did not tell the police that she had been raped. Her assailant had told her that two things had to remain a secret: that he had been in the military and that he had assaulted her. If she told anyone, he warned her, he would harm her family. Back in Vallejo, when police found out that their murder victim was alive, well, and corroborating her husband's story, they quickly pivoted. Instead of saying that they were wrong and further investigating the crime, they had a new theory, that the whole thing was a hoax. When Denise finally revealed to her lawyer that she had been raped and that her attacker was former military, police jumped on the fact that she had, quote, changed her story. And sure, at first I thought this was kind of weird too, but then I thought about it. Those are the two details that might help the police identify the guy, and wouldn't it make sense that her attacker would threaten Denise to make her keep quiet about those two specific details? Anyway, police had told the couple that whichever one confessed to the crime would be offered immunity. Then they told the public that the whole thing was a hoax.
Mr. Quinn and Ms. Huskins has plundered valuable resources away from our community and has taken the focus away from the true victims of our community while instilling fear amongst our community members. So if anything, it is Mr. Quinn and Ms. Huskins that owes this community an apology.
This whole thing was exacerbated by the fact that the movie Gone Girl had just come out. The idea of a real-life version of that movie where a woman fakes her own disappearance to get back at a cheating husband just thrilled everybody. Here's the weirdest part of the story. When Denise and Aaron were being hounded by the police and abused in the media and online, one of her abductors sent a series of rambling emails to the San Francisco Chronicle defending Denise's honor. The writer claimed to be part of the gang of gentlemen criminals. We are young adults, fairly recent college graduates, and up until now, this was a bit like a game or movie adventure. We fancied ourselves as sort of Ocean's 11 gentlemen criminals who only took stuff that was insured from people who could afford it. The horrifying reality of what we had become and what we were doing until we were confronted with Denise's suffering and humanity. The letter writer was upset that the police didn't believe Denise, saying, "Denise was absolutely kidnapped. We did it. We would rather take the chance of revealing the truth than live in a world where someone like Denise is victimized again." In spite of these letters, police persisted in believing that there was no kidnapper. Perhaps they had even believed that Denise was writing the letters herself. At a certain point, it's like, come on guys. Are police even allowed to be conspiracy nuts? Isn't there some kind of like follow every lead rule? Whatever. Denise Huskins might have gone the rest of her life being called the real-life Gone Girl, but then one of her abductors decided to strike again. 3 months after Denise was found, there was a similar home invasion in Dublin, California. A couple was awakened and told to tie each other up, but the wife managed to escape and call 911 while her husband fought off the attacker. The suspect fled but left his cell phone behind him. Police traced the cell to the home of Matthew Muller, a Harvard-educated former attorney. Muller was also a former Marine, and in his possession was a water gun with a laser attached to it, which in a dark bedroom would have looked like a real gun. Muller also had zip ties, a pair of two-way radios, and goggles covered in tape. One pair of goggles had a long blonde hair attached to it. That hair belonged to Denise Huskins. Matthew Muller was arrested and charged with Denise's kidnapping. Finally, the police were forced to believe that the kidnapping had really happened. Denise and Aaron still insist that there were multiple intruders in their home that night, but in spite of what Matthew Muller wrote in those letters to the Chronicle, he now claims that he acted alone. He also claims that he suffers from bipolar disorder and claims that the condition is part on his actions. Muller pled guilty to Denise's kidnapping and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Denise Huskins and Aaron Quinn were finally vindicated. In March 2016, the couple filed a suit against the Vallejo Police Department, accusing the department of defamation, false arrest, and false imprisonment, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. They settled out of court for $2.5 million, though part of that settlement is that the Vallejo police admitted no wrongdoing. Aaron Quinn and Denise Huskins were married in 2018, and they now have a daughter together. The Vallejo Police Department had one final chance to do their jobs, by apologizing to Denise and Aaron for dragging them through hell. In this instance, the police did finally step up and do the right thing. They issued a public apology in 2021. 6 years later, and only after the department changed leadership. Wow. On April 29, 2021, Miguel Lamboy came home from vacation. He had lent his house to some of his friends while he was gone. When Miguel went into his back bedroom, he found a shrine had been built around the mummified remains of a woman. Her body was wrapped in a sleeping bag. She had glitter smeared around her eye sockets, though the eyes themselves were missing. Christmas lights surrounded her body. This was the body of a woman Miguel himself had called Mom, but not because of any blood relation. She was the leader of his cult, and her full title was Mother God. In 2006, a woman in her early 30s named Amy Carlson was working as a manager at McDonald's. Amy was on her third marriage. Although she had been reputably sweet and intelligent as a teenager, something changed in Amy shortly after the birth of her third child. She became distant from her mother and sister and eventually abandoned her kids to join up with a man she had met online. He called himself Father God. Amy became Mother God, and the two of them began communicating via live stream in 2012.
This is Mother and Father God and the Earth Allies, and we declare peace on Earth, equal heart.
Peace on Earth.
In 2014, Amy began mentioning her ground team.
This is Mother God with the First Contact Ground Crew team. Our roles are to prepare those who are ready to come home into heaven, 5D reality, and we are ready for all of you. We have our away teams present on this planet.
This was in 2014, and Amy had just left Father God. But being the mother of all creation, it was easy for her to make a new one. Out of her heart, she said. She said she made Father God out of her heart. It must have been easy, because over the next 8 years, Amy cycled through at least 5 more Father Gods. All of them lovers, all of them made out of her heart. What do you think of that, ladies? The first mention of the name Love Has Won came in 2016, and Amy started to gather followers. She described Love Has Won as a spiritual organization with roots in the mythical lost continent Lemuria. Amy herself claimed that she could speak to angels and cure cancer. She told her followers that she would help guide chosen ones towards a great awakening or new dimension. She said that she was on her 534th reincarnation in her quest to recover my beloved planet, the center of the universe and the first planet I created. She said that in her past lives she had been Jesus Christ, Joan of Arc, Marilyn Monroe, Pocahontas, Cleopatra, Harriet Tubman, Amelia Earhart, and a bunch more. Unlike the rest of us, Amy was born unhampered with an ego and told her followers that she had been living in a higher consciousness for her whole life. Or lives, I guess I should say. She claimed to remember all of them. When Donald Trump became president, Amy began saying he was her father. Though even that isn't as weird as when she said Robin Williams appeared to her after he died and has been hanging out in her bedroom ever since. Amy also began performing spiritual surgeries. For a fee, Mother God would extract from your physical vessel every inorganic element that had been put there by the cabal to control your life and limit your experiences to what serves their obscure agenda. She didn't even have to meet you to do this, just send her cash and she could do it right from her home. Amy's followers believed that she'd been trying to save humanity for 19 billion years and would soon lead 144,000 chosen ones into a new mystical dimension. They would leave either via a starship or a portal into the ocean. And if you're thinking, what happens to the rest of us? Don't worry, everyone else will be recycled into the galactic sun. The elements of Love is One might ring a bell for you. That's because none of them are actually new. It's a hodgepodge of major religions, New Age spiritualism, and conspiracy theories. Even the idea of an evil cabal secretly controlling the world and eating children is from the book of QAnon. But something about Amy's personality seemed to attract people. Members of Love is One were recruited through Facebook and YouTube. Joining the group meant giving all of your worldly possessions, most importantly your money, to Love is One. It also meant cutting yourself off from your loved ones. You know, classic cult stuff. On top of taking money from its new acolytes, Love is One ran a website called Gaia's Whole Healing Essentials, which sold vitamins, supplements, and essential oils. Amazingly, they claimed to be able to cure anything because, quote, everything is vibrational, unquote. This means, among other things, that Love is One claimed lemons could cure cancer. Around 2018, Love is One began to take a seriously dark turn. Some blame Amy's alcoholism, which was manifesting in increasingly violent ways. Others say that she was suffering from an undiagnosed mental illness that was getting worse with age. Either way, videos started to surface in which Amy was verbally abusing members of Love is One. In one video, she can be seen telling followers to lock a distressed and crying child alone in a dark closet. In others, she was verbally berating followers.
I'm fucking God, you fucking whores.
My vision was chicken parmesan. So the fucking atoms turn around on me and get me meatballs. I didn't say meatballs. I love meatballs. But I didn't fucking say that!
Or being abusive to a cat.
Stop being a bitch!
Cute kitty.
Bitch!
It should be noticed that while never officially diagnosed, many people believe that Amy suffered from mental health issues stemming from trauma experienced in childhood. It is known that she suffered from addiction issues. At one point, Amy's mother and sister brought her on to Dr. Phil.
It seems like your tone is not always peaceful with your followers. Let me let you look at this and then you can comment on it.
Kill me! Spiritual ego horse, done! My own light workers, battle me! Serving love! And bringing in a new paradigm, you whores!
Wow. That seems pretty aggressive for someone that's leading the world to love.
In 2018, a man named Jason Castillo became sixth in the long line of father gods. He is a far cry from the cheerful figure of Amy's first father god. While many blame the dark turn of Love Is One on Amy, others point the finger at Castillo.
You know how they give the shit to the fucking You hear that word? It's a cockroach. It's the fucking lowest form that hates God. That's what a is. It's nothing to do with color. They switch that around on you too. Trigger, 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 trigger. They've turned you into a fucking slave.
Between 2018 and 2021, Amy continued to spiral in her live streams and in videos that leaked from the Love Is One compound. In the meantime, here's what you could expect as a member of Love Is One. Sex was forbidden unless Amy assigned you a twin flame, i.e. a soulmate of her choosing. Drugs and alcohol were forbidden unless you were Amy or Jason. You were prevented from sleeping more than 4 hours a day, and your food intake was limited. Amy claimed that members could get by with less food and sleep because they were tapping into their hidden energies. In reality, limiting sleep and food is a common theme in cults, because it makes it difficult for members to think critically about what is happening around them. Your phone is confiscated and you are not allowed to contact your family, unless your family is dead. Did we mention one of the ways that Love Is One pulls people in is by claiming that Mother God can help them connect with the dead? Around this time, the sheriff's office began stacking up complaints against the group, including sexual assault charges brought against Jason Castillo, alleged arson, alleged sexual trafficking, and multiple complaints of brainwashing and fraud. At one point, the group claimed Castillo was on an important mission for God. In reality, he was in a Florida prison for trespassing. In 2020, Love Is One relocated to Hawaii. There are two versions of this story. One is that the group was fleeing rumors that they were connected to a missing teenager in Colorado. The other is that Amy, whose health was failing rapidly, was looking for new natural cures. But in Hawaii, Love Is One had run-ins with locals, who were upset not only by the presence of the cult, but by the fact that Amy proclaimed herself to be the reincarnation of the Hawaiian goddess of fire. When Love Is One members refused to follow any local mask mandates, they were evicted from the island and returned to Colorado. While this was going on, Amy had been growing increasingly ill. Her father claimed she had cancer and needed help. Her followers claimed that she was ascending from her physical body. Several wellness checks and ambulances were dispatched to try and help Amy as she appeared extremely ill on live streams. All attempts to help were rebuffed by the members of Love Is One, who believed Amy was God and the medical system was in service of the evil cabal running the world. Miguel Lamboy lent his home out to the other members of Love Is One in the spring of 2021. When he came home and found Amy's body, he called the police. A coroner confirmed that Amy had been dead for weeks or even months before her body was found. Amy's manner of death has not been released, but police have stated that there were no signs of foul play. Amy's family stated that they had been expecting her death for a long time because she was taking massive amounts of colloidal silver to try and defend against the coronavirus. This cure was actually on sale on the Love Is One website for a while, before the FDA made them take it down. The FDA's reasoning was that not only will silver not cure COVID, it can kill you. Pictures from this year shows Amy's skin as having a sickly blue tint, a symptom of silver poisoning. 7 people, including Jason Castillo, were charged with abusing a corpse. They were also charged with child abuse, as 2 kids were inside that house while Amy's body was there. One was a 13-year-old girl and the other a 2-year-old boy. Thankfully, the kids are okay, but they've risked bacteria, disease, and trauma from the body. Here's a fun little postscript to a bizarre story. Miguel Lamboy, the one who lent his house out to cult members and came home to a dead body, he got his revenge by stealing every single penny in the Love Has One bank accounts. There's a lot of weird, sad, and terrible stories out there about Amy Carlson and the Love Has Won cult, so we had to pick and choose. In May of 2015, police were called to a residence in Inslee Township, Michigan. A neighbor had grown concerned after not hearing from her friends for 2 days and went to their house only to discover their bodies on the floor. Fire and medical personnel were quick to the scene, but after a quick assessment, determined that there was nothing they could do. It wasn't until a state trooper arrived that anyone went over to the bodies, where they made the shocking discovery that one of them was still alive. Bodies that were found that day belonged to Marty and Glenna Durham, a married couple in their 40s. Marty had succumbed to his injuries after 5 bullets ravaged his body, but his wife Glenna was found to be alive even though she had 2 bullet holes in her head. While initially there may have been sympathy and concern felt for Glenna by the authorities, those feelings didn't last long. The day after Marty was found dead, his adult children broke into the home he shared with Glenna to look through the rooms. Whether they were trying to find information about their father, valuable items, or both is unclear. What they did observe is that the home was messy and disorganized, as though items had been flung all over the place. However, they soon discovered something even more alarming. They found letters from Glenna asking her ex-husband to take care of their children, as well as letters to her children asking for forgiveness and telling them that she loved them. To many, these letters read as suicide notes. While Marty's children immediately turned over the letters to police, they did leave something out. They had found $225 in cash in an envelope marked Mount, and $1,200 in an envelope that said Wave Runner on the front. When the omission was discovered later in the investigation, the children said they kept the money because the police hadn't asked. While this was bizarre development, it was only the first of many in a long line of oddities to happen over the next 19 months. As the case unfolded, the police got a look at what seemed to be a particularly troubling relationship. The two of them had been married since 2005, but since Marty had suffered a brain injury from a car incident in the 90s, his health had been poor for years. In 2010, Glenna became Marty's caregiver, and it did not seem to be a role she relished. According to interviews with Marty's family, Glenna would often joke about waiting for her husband to die or how she wanted to kill him so she could take everything he owned. Another relative said Glenna had called Marty a pain in the ass to take care of, and that one day she was going to kill him. While these comments certainly sound disturbing, Marty's daughter said that Marty would hear them and laugh. Sure, couples do dark jokes sometimes, but what if there was truth to what Glenna was saying? Because as soon as police soon found out, she did seem to have a motive for staying with him, even if she was unhappy. Turns out, Glenna Durham had a bit of a gambling problem. It was uncovered that Glenna went to casinos once or twice a week, as well as purchasing lottery tickets, sometimes to the tune of $100 each, up to 4 times a week. This information was gleaned through interviews with Glenna, family members, as well as gas station clerks where Glenna would buy tickets. In the police report, it is stated that in 2010, she gambled $75,000 at casinos alone. But why would her gambling habit keep her with a man she didn't like? Because of Marty's brain injury, she was his caregiver, which meant the state paid her over $3,000 a month to care for him, while he also received $1,100 a month in disability. Glenna was in charge of their finances, and it seems that his disability was fueling her gambling habit. However, the money coming in wasn't enough to feed her appetite, and although Marty didn't know it, the couple was in enormous debt. At the time of the shooting, the couple's house was about to go into foreclosure, with the house auction scheduled to happen on the day of the shooting itself. Marty had been made aware of a notice in the paper that said his house was up for foreclosure, but when he confronted Glenna about it, she assured him that it had been a mistake. When police totaled up the couple's finances, it was found that they only held $500 in cash, as well as being thousands of dollars in debt. While all this information was intriguing, it wasn't enough to convict Glenna. Despite the poor taste and humor, it seemed the two had gotten along, and Glenna insisted to police that if she hadn't wanted to be with her husband, she would have divorced him instead of killing him. As the police continued to gather information about this peculiar couple, they were contacted by a psychic named Fran Phelan, who also happened to be the wife of one of Marty's cousins. Upon meeting with police, she had revealed a notebook where she had jotted down some apparent visions she had surrounding Marty's death. She told police they should look under the couch or love seat of the couple's home, and also informed them that both Marty and Glenna were right-handed, and that their hands played an important role in the investigation. In a bizarre turn of events, the police recovered the murder weapon, a Ruger .6 under the love seat, as well as a clump of hair in Marty's right hand. While police were immediately suspicious as to how Fran had come to know of this private information, they soon determined that she had a solid alibi during the shooting. However, that wasn't the end of Fran's involvement with the case. She insisted on Glenna's innocence and even testified on her behalf. This drove Marty's family, who firmly believed Glenna to be responsible for his death, into a rage. Many of them began to threaten Fran online, and after a probate hearing, an arrow was found at Fran's home with the message, "You're next," on it. While Fran was an interesting part of the investigation, her part slowly faded into the background as the featured player was just waiting to be revealed. Police continued to press Glenna, and she continued to assert her innocence, even after it was shown that she had used her phone to look up information on Ruger, and specifically the Ruger .6, during the early morning on the day that Marty died. A text to Glenna's mother later in the day was sent that simply said, "Love you, sorry." However, despite both these actions seeming suspicious, the police didn't have quite enough yet to convince a jury that Glenna was guilty of killing her husband. Of course, throughout the investigation, police had been meeting with countless friends, family members, and acquaintances, and during those interviews, many of them brought up the name of someone they felt the police might want to interview. That someone's name was Bud, but for months the police ignored the suggestion to interview him. It might seem strange that no one would want to interview someone who knew the victim and suspect personally, but the police had a good reason. Bud was a parrot. Bud is an African gray, an extremely smart and affectionate type of parrot, and he had been Glenna and Marty's pet. Like many parrots, Bud was able to speak and mimic voices, and he was well known for being foul-mouthed and quickly picking up phrases and sentences. While many friends of the family suggested the police interview him, the police dismissed the idea as a joke until several months later. After Marty's death, Bud had been placed into the care of Marty's ex-wife, Christina Keller. They had cared for the parrot together before their divorce, and she was used to the bird and his habits. But shortly after she resumed care for him, she noticed he kept repeating the same words, the same conversation, over and over again. Bud, in voices Christina insists are Glenna and Marty's, will repeat a conversation that includes the words, "Get your over here," and then chillingly the words, "Don't shoot." Christina told reporters that Bud would use this conversation at least once a week, and it gave her the chills every time. The video came to attention after the family shared it with a local news station, where it quickly attracted international attention. This was a year after Marty's death. When Christina was asked why she didn't share the video sooner, she didn't have a clear answer, but her reason for sharing it now was clear. The family was furious that Glenna hadn't been arrested, and they wanted to push the case forward. Although the parrot seemed to be a clear witness, he was never actually interviewed by police or put on the stand. Due to the fact that he was, well, a bird, it made the legalities of him testifying rather tricky. However, the video certainly spurred interest in the case, and the police continued to build evidence against the woman they now felt certain had murdered Marty Durham. Over a year after the strange circumstances surrounding the shooting, Glenna Durham was arrested and charged with the murder of her husband. Police never publicly announced what had been the turning point in the investigation, but there were many factors at play. Gambling addiction, crushing debt, Glenna's apparent dislike of Marty, and her search history on the murder weapon were the building blocks for her arrest. And the psychic, testimony from friends and family, and Bud the parrot all had hands in bringing her to justice. Glenna's trial took place in the summer of 2017, 2 years after the murder. It took the jury only 8 hours of deliberation before coming back with a guilty verdict. Glenna was charged with first-degree murder and a felony firearm charge. It was found that she shot her husband 5 times and then tried to turn the gun on herself to commit suicide. She was sentenced to life in prison with no parole. In 2019, Glenna was denied an appeal by the Michigan Court of Appeals. Although Glenna is facing down the rest of her life in prison, so many questions remain. Why did she do it? How did Fran know so much? Is Bud really reciting the last interaction between Glenna and Marty, or was he fed those lines by a TV show or a family member eager to see Glenna take the fall? Due to her injuries, Glenna couldn't be interviewed by police until months after the incident, and at that point she claimed not to remember writing any letters to her children or making any decision to end her life or Marty's. What she did share is that she has bipolar disorder and was suffering from depression. The police never found any evidence that anyone had broken into the couple's home. While we may never know the why, a court has decided that Glenna is the one responsible for Marty's death. While it is a sad ending, hopefully the conviction provided some closure for Marty's family. Glenna Durham is serving her life sentence at Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Pittsfield Charter Township, Michigan. Bud the Parrot is living his best life and will hopefully not witness any more violent crimes. 19-year-old Brittany Wood was last seen on the night of May 30th, 2012 with her uncle Donnie Holland. The mystery of her disappearance has never been solved, but the investigation that followed unveiled a dark, twisted tale of shocking perversion in the working-class neighborhoods in the piney backwoods of coastal Alabama. Just a warning, this story contains mention of sexual abuse and may be triggering for some viewers. Brittany Wood led a troubled life. As a child, she was molested by her step-grandfather, who went to jail for his crimes. She became a single mom at age 17 and bounced around between the homes of family members with her daughter. Brittany turned to drugs to soften her emotional turmoil. She began carrying a gun for protection. The night she disappeared, eyewitnesses and cell phone data both show Brittany leaving West Mobile, Alabama, and traveling to neighboring Baldwin County with her uncle Donnie Holland. Coincidentally, Holland was found dead in his vehicle 2 days later from possible attempted suicide, having suffered from an odd gunshot wound through the back of his ear. Holland was taken to the hospital where he never regained consciousness before he died from his injuries. It was after the discovery of Holland's body that people began to realize Brittany was nowhere to be found. Investigators found Brittany's gun in Holland's car, along with the battery to her cell phone. There were no other signs of Brittany being dead or alive. It was at this point a crazy story of an incestual Alabama child sex ring began to emerge, and the details became public knowledge. Holland was scheduled to be questioned about allegations of sexual abuse the very day he was found in the car on an isolated dirt road. A relative had reported Holland for abusing one of the girls in the family in February 2012, and a word of his misdeeds had spread through their family and close friends. Brittany's stepmother came forward after Brittany was declared missing. She showed detectives private Facebook messages between a female family member and Brittany. The female family member told Brittany that she had been raped by 3 men in the family. Brittany disappeared just 3 days later. In the months following Brittany's disappearance, nearly a dozen relatives were arrested in connection with the child sex ring. 2 of Brittany's uncles, Dustin Kent and Scott Wood, were arrested within 3 weeks and later pleaded guilty to rape and sodomy. Aunts and family friends were eventually charged as well. Even Brittany's own mother and older brother were tried in court. 50-year-old family friend Billy Brownlee was convicted in Baldwin County on charges of sexually abusing a girl in the Holland family when she was just about 12. Brownlee claimed Donnie Holland forced him into the acts against his will, but jurors needed only 20 minutes to return a guilty verdict. Holland's wife, who was 35 years old at the time of Brittany's disappearance, was also accused of sex crimes and sent to trial where she pled not guilty. One girl in the family accused an uncle of sexually abusing her as early as 2008, but welfare workers found the complaint unsubstantiated at the time. The uncle wasn't prosecuted until 2012. What was going on in this family? And for how long? The public was shocked to hear about the family's crimes in their community. Everyone began asking how such heinous actions could have continued for years without anyone intervening. It was in court that the family's traditions were finally spoken out loud. Instead of family barbecues, the Wood family had family nights a little differently. One teen testified in court saying she was frequently forced to have sex with her adult relatives, often in group sex situations. We would be in a circle and we'd all switch up, she testified in 2014 during her Aunt Wendy Holland's trial for sodomy, sexual abuse, sexual torture, and child endangerment. Authorities believe group sex and child sexual abuse went on for 3 generations in 2 families that merged when Donnie Holland married Wendy Wood, the sister of Brittany's mom, Chessie. You'd be surprised how many of the family were involved, said Assistant District Attorney Nikki Patterson. She went on to say, you have the perfect storm where you have different individuals from damaged backgrounds themselves who had developed an interest in relationships with children and found one another and sort of fed off one another's fetishes. The case is so large that officials can't determine exactly how many children from both inside and outside the family were abused. Estimates range from 11 to 16 children who were as young as 3 or 4 years old when they were first molested or made to watch adult relatives during drug-fueled orgies. The children of the suspects have since been placed in foster care or with relatives who weren't involved with the crimes. One victim in particular remembered losing her virginity at the age of 3 to her own father, said former Baldwin County Sheriff's Detective Eric Winberg. Brittany is believed to be one of the victims. Had she not disappeared, she would have been a key witness in the case. Brittany's mother, Chessie Wood, said she was surprised to learn her brother-in-law, Donnie Holland, may have been involved in the disturbing deeds and said she didn't know about the abuse. She said he was very charismatic, friendly, happy, very outgoing. He rode the roads all the time, going here and there. We thought he was enjoying life to its fullest. Chessie now believes Holland had something to do with her daughter's disappearance. So what happened in the trials against all the abusive relatives? Well, Wendy Holland, Donnie's wife and Chessie's sister, was sentenced to more than 200 years in jail for her involvement in the sex ring. She was convicted of sodomy, sexual abuse, sexual torture, and child endangerment. Wendy brought in her own daughter into having sex with grown men and taught her how to pleasure them. Mindy Kent, Wendy's identical twin sister, also landed behind bars after Mobile County jurors convicted her of sodomy and sexual abuse of a child under the age of 12 in 2015. She was sentenced to up to 40 years in jail. Dustin Kent, who is married to Mindy Kent, pleaded guilty in 2014 to charges of second-degree rape and second-degree sodomy in connections with allegations that he sexually abused family members between the ages of 12 and 16 years old. He pleaded guilty as part of a plea agreement that dropped additional charges against him. He was sentenced to 17 years in prison for his role in the sexual abuse. Derek Wood, Brittany's oldest brother, was not only convicted in the case, but had also been a victim himself. He began to be sexually abused by Donnie and Wendy around the age of 6 or 7 years old and said the abuse continued through his early teenage years. He said it would be some friends of theirs. Older women would come over, they would get involved, and Donnie would take pictures and coerce me into what I was doing. But as far as family members, it was just Donnie and Wendy. Derek testified that he had sex with his Aunt Wendy for the first time when he was only 14 years old. He was charged with sexual abuse of a cousin who was between the ages of 12 and 16 years old after he had turned 18. He received 3 years behind bars. He said, "My life has been a mess ever since, and still to this day they won't help me. They won't let me go to any rehab," he said of the authorities. "I guess I'm just a monster in their eyes." Brittany's mother, Chessie, found herself under arrest in 2013. She was accused of having sex with Donnie and inviting a minor family member to join. Chessie insists these allegations are untrue and even passed a lie detector test. Chessie insisted that she had never had sex with Donnie or touched any of her nieces and nephews. However, she pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor of child endangerment to end the case because she wanted to continue on the search for her daughter. 2 friends of the Holland and Wood families, Nelton Butch Morgan and William Brown Lee, were also convicted of sex crimes against children in the family, and they were sent to jail. It's been almost 10 years since Brittany Wood vanished without a trace. Multiple searches have turned up no sign of her, alive or dead. Her mother, Chessie, says she's planning a funeral for the 10th anniversary of Brittany's disappearance. A little while ago, I joked that we were going to rename this channel Badass Women Thinking Fast. In honor of that title, today we're going to look at one of the most badass survivors of all time, Mary Vincent, who at the age of 15 survived a brutal attack and incredible odds to put her rapist behind bars. The 70s. The pants were flared, the shirts were tie-dyed, and everyone, and we mean everyone, was hitchhiking. That included 15-year-old Mary Vincent, who in 1978 was dealing with the tumult of her parents' divorce and a difficult home life. Mary decided to leave her family home in Berkeley, California, and hitchhike to her grandfather's home in Corona. On September 29th, Mary stood at the side of the road thumbing a ride beside two other hitchhikers. 50-year-old Lawrence Singleton pulled up in his van. Singleton told the hitchhikers that he was going their way, but that he only had room for Mary. This struck the other hitchhikers as odd. Singleton had lots of room in his van, so why could he only take the teenage girl?
I didn't think about what type of person he was or the situation. I was tired. And he seemed like a grandfather type figure.
Mary fell asleep as they drove, and when she woke up, she realized that Lawrence Singleton had been driving her in the wrong direction. He apologized and pulled over the van. He told her that he needed to grab something from the back and that afterwards he would turn around and get her home. Mary had a bad feeling. While Singleton went to the back of the van, she got out and bent over to tie her shoe, preparing to run. That's when he came up behind her and hit her in the head with a sledgehammer. She blacked out. When Mary came to, she was tied up in the back of the van. They were parked along a quiet road so nobody could hear her scream.
He began raping me. I asked why he was doing this. There was no response. He raped me a few times, probably about 6 times, and he fell asleep, but I couldn't get away because I was completely tied. I wanted to die. That was the worst feeling I've ever felt. That's all I was thinking. Please, God, kill me now.
Mary's attack lasted through the night. When the morning came, she begged Singleton to let her free.
And he said, "You want to be set free? I'll set you free."
Singleton pulled out a hatchet and cut off both of Mary's arms at the elbow. She fought hard and the wounds were not clean. At one point, Mary fell to the ground and looked up to see Singleton frantically flicking his arm. She saw that her own dismembered hand was still clutching his sleeve. Thinking Mary was dead, Singleton rolled her body over the edge of a 30-foot cliff, leaving her to bleed out in a culvert. The fall contributed 4 broken ribs to her already grievous injuries.
All I wanted to do was go to sleep. But all I heard was a voice saying that I can't go to sleep. He's gonna do this to somebody else. And I can't let that happen. That's what was going through my heart, my mind, and my soul. And I couldn't have him do that to another girl.
To stop the bleeding, Mary dug the stumps of her arms into the dirt of the ravine, creating impromptu mud packs. Then she began crawling back up the cliff towards the road. It took her all day, and when she got there, the highway was deserted. So she began walking towards the distant sounds of traffic, guiding herself by moonlight and holding the stumps of her arms in the air so that gravity would help to keep her blood inside her body. After 3 miles of walking, a convertible with 2 passengers drove by. But when they saw Mary's nightmarish form soaked in blood and dirt, they sped off.
I mean, think about it. I have no hands now, and I'm covered from head to toe in blood. I look like something from a Fright Night movie. And they took off. So all I could think of was, I'm gonna die out here. Because everyone's too afraid to even stop.
The next car that drove by held a honeymooning couple. They were only on that particular road because they had gotten lost. Luckily, the couple stopped for Mary and raced off to the nearest phone. Mary was airlifted by helicopter to the closest hospital. She had lost more than half of the blood in her body. From her hospital bed, Mary was able to perform yet another miracle. She described her attacker to a police sketch artist with such precision that when Lawrence Singleton's neighbor saw the sketch on the news, she knew immediately who the attacker was. It took police only 10 days to identify, find, and charge Lawrence Singleton. 6 months after the attack, Mary was in court telling a jury exactly what she had gone through in the 24 hours during and after her time with Lawrence Singleton. He was found guilty of kidnapping, attempted murder, and rape. But it was the 70s, remember? So all of those crimes added up to a sentence of only 14 years in prison, the maximum allowed at the time. Mary Vincent showed immense courage throughout the proceedings, but she fled the court one day after Singleton whispered something to her. As she walked past his seat in the court, Singleton told her,
"If it's the last thing I do, I will finish the job," quote unquote.
At the time, inmates in California were allowed to earn 1 day off of their sentences for every day that they worked inside the prison. Lawrence Singleton acted as an assistant teacher inside a prison classroom, which meant that his rape, torture, and attempted murder of Mary Vincent only kept him behind bars for a total of 8 years. He expressed no remorse for Mary's mutilation, claiming that she was a, quote, $10 whore, and that he attacked her because she threatened to accuse him of rape. In other words, he was the victim and Mary was a liar who chopped her own arms off? Well, no, said Singleton. There was another guy in the van with him, whose name was Larry, but a different Larry. Not him. Whatever, bro. When word got out that Lawrence Singleton was getting out of prison, Mary Vincent was terrified. She dropped out of school, developed an eating disorder, and struggled to leave the house. Her marriage crumbled, and her fear drove her to move from place to place. She ended up in hiding. So did Singleton's daughter, whose own experiences with her father caused her to change her name multiple times and move across state lines. An amazing part of this story is that while technically Singleton was allowed out on parole, he ran into a problem. He was so reviled that town after town refused to accept him. In Tampa, angry crowds picketed and protested until Singleton was removed. In Rodeo, a crowd of 500 forced police to move Singleton from his hotel room with an armed guard. In Concord, protests made local officials cave and reject the parolee. On one occasion, Singleton was under such threat that he had to be removed from an apartment with a bulletproof vest. Finally, with no city willing to take him, Singleton was forced to live out his year of parole on the grounds of San Quentin. After that, he was free to move wherever he wanted. He chose Florida, where in 1997, a neighbor saw Singleton stab a woman to death in his living room. The victim's name was Roxanne Hayes. She was a mother of 3. At the trial, Mary Vincent again stepped forward and faced her attacker in court, telling the jury of his previous crimes. Lawrence Singleton was sentenced to death for the murder of Roxanne Hayes, but he died of cancer in prison before the sentence was carried out. Thanks in part to the advocacy of Mary Vincent, the Singleton bill was later drafted in the California legislature, preventing the early release of criminals whose crime involved torture. The minimum sentence for a crime involving torture is now 25 years. Today, Mary Vincent is a thriving artist, mother, wife, and victims advocate. Her prosthetic hands are not a limitation. She's an accomplished portrait artist, bowler, pool player, and inventor, among other accomplishments. Mary has spoken publicly about her ordeal and continues to fight for victims' rights.
It's God and my sons that keep me going. They keep me loving life more than most people. I appreciate it more, and I'm just glad that I'm given another chance at life, that I didn't die.
On January 13, 1976, 16-year-old Pamela Moore was playing cards at a friend's house in Woodridge, Illinois. Around 8:30 p.m., she left to get a Coke at a nearby McDonald's. The fast food place was only 2 blocks away, but Pamela never returned. The next morning, her body was found in a ditch. She had been raped and murdered. Pamela was one of 6 young women murdered in the area between 1972 and 1976. 2 years after her death, a man named Bruce Lindahl moved away from Woodridge to a nearby town of Aurora. On March 6, 1979, Bruce Lindahl struck up a conversation with 20-year-old Annette Lazar, also a resident of Aurora. Lindahl offered to sell Lazar marijuana at his place, and it being a time before stranger danger, Lazar went. Once at his home, Lindahl pointed a gun at Lazar's head and forced her into his bedroom, where he raped her at gunpoint. Later evidence would show that Lazar's very life was in danger, but even while under violent assault, she managed to form a strategy.
I decided to flatter him and compliment him and tell him I really liked him, he's my type.
Lazar managed to convince Lindahl that if he let her go, she would be his girlfriend. She even wrote down her name and phone number and gave it to him. Lindahl agreed to let Lazar go, but warned her that nobody would ever believe her story since his roommate was a cop. Lazar went to the police anyway. Her evidence included bruises around her throat, a rape test conducted immediately after the incident, and a red mark on her head from where the gun had been pressed against her temple. Police went to Lindahl's house. He told them that Annette Lazar was his girlfriend and showed them the piece of paper with her name on it. This was apparently good enough for the police. They decided to drop the case.
I had bruises on my neck, and I even had a red mark where he put the gun to my temple, and they didn't believe me. I just was in shock. I thought they would believe me, you know? And that's why I went to the police, to prevent this from happening to anyone else.
15 months later, 25-year-old Deborah Colliander was abducted from the Northgate Shopping Center in Aurora, where Lindahl pulled a weapon on her in the parking lot and forced her to drive away with him. Lindahl drove Colliander back to his house, took photos of her, and raped her. Colliander waited until her attacker was asleep, at which point she escaped from the house and ran naked to a neighbor, Karen Weeks Cosma. When Colliander described the man who had raped her as having remarkably blue eyes, Karen knew immediately who she was talking about. This time, when police showed up at his house, they found Bruce Lindahl still asleep. He hadn't managed to hide the evidence of his crime, which included the photos of Colliander that were strewn about his bed. Lindahl was charged with deviant sexual conduct, rape, and aggravated kidnapping, but he paid his bail and was released on bond. 2 weeks before Colliander was scheduled to testify against her attacker, she vanished after leaving work. Her body wasn't found until nearly 2 years later. Karen Weeks Cosma, the neighbor who helped Colliander after the attack, recounted that after Colliander disappeared, Lindahl would walk his dog in the rain and just stand on that corner, looking at my house, or he'd drive past the house and stop and watch my girls playing in the yard, sort of teasing or threatening me. Because their primary witness had vanished, the prosecution dropped the case and Lindahl got off scot-free once more. Bruce Lindahl continued to get into a variety of trouble, including aggravated assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and allegedly attacking a 30-year-old woman outside of a restaurant when she refused his advances. One night, police even encountered Lindahl driving around with a woman in his car, unconscious and bleeding from a gash in her head. Lindahl claimed that he was taking the woman to a hospital, but that story seemed doubtful. He was driving the wrong way. An ambulance was called, and a rape kit showed that the unidentified young woman had been sexually assaulted. But all she remembered was taking a sip of a drink that Lindahl had given her at the party. Once again, no charges were filed. It wasn't until April 4th, 1981 that Bruce Lindahl was brought down, not by the law, but by his own hand. That was when Lindahl met 18-year-old Charles Huber at a bowling alley in Naperville. Through an unknown series of events, the two men ended up at the apartment of Lindahl's girlfriend. We don't know what brought them there or what Lindahl's motives were, but by the time his girlfriend returned home, there were two bodies in her apartment. One was Charles Huber, killed at the age of 18 by 28 stab wounds. The other was Bruce Lindahl himself. In his rage, Lindahl had swiped too wildly at his intended victim, slicing himself in the leg and cutting into his femoral artery. He would have bled out within minutes. Not to be a jerk about it, but I hope it was painful. 1 year later, Deborah Colliander's body was found by a farmer in a shallow grave. Authorities believe that Lindahl is responsible for her death. When new owners came into possession of Lindahl's house, they found hundreds of photos of naked people hidden in the walls, under the floorboards, and in the ceilings. Not knowing their significance, the new owners threw the photos out, though some were later recovered and used to identify more of Lindahl's victims. The photos included one of Deb McCall, a high school student who disappeared in 1979. Police now believe that she was murdered. They also believe that Lindahl wasn't just a serial rapist, he was a serial killer.
Investigators now believe Bruce Lindahl murdered at least 12 people. Until today, we only knew about 4.
Almost 40 years after his death, in January of 2020, authorities announced that they had exhumed Lindahl's body to access his DNA. It was then that they were able to conclusively connect Lindahl to the 1976 killing of Pam Moorer, the 16-year-old girl from the beginning of our story.
Both the DuPage County Sheriff's Crime Laboratory and DNA Labs International were successful in extracting and profiling DNA from the remains of Bruce Lindahl, which confirmed that the DNA evidence recovered from Pam's body was consistent with Bruce Lindahl's DNA profile.
Police investigators say that Lindahl may be responsible for as many as 12 other murders and 9 rapes across the west suburbs. Using his DNA profile, the tips that have come pouring in, and the photos from the house, they hope that several cold cases from the area may still be solved.
Okay, what is the emergency?
I have a older male here named Alex. He just passed out here on my bathroom.
Okay, is he awake right now?
I think he's passed out.
Okay, you think he's unconscious?
Yes.
The unconscious man in this phone call is named Alex Cox. Alex was found by his stepson as he laid on the floor of his bathroom.
Okay, is he on his back or on his stomach? Where is he at?
He's on his side.
Okay. Can you lay him flat on his back on the ground?
I'll try. It's just there's feces there, and I'm trying to just keep cool right now.
You said he's what?
There's feces on the ground.
Okay. I know that's gross, but if we can just go ahead and get him flat on his back, I want to make sure he's breathing, because if he's not, we're going to do a few things. Does he seem more awake or more asleep?
He's more passed out.
Okay, is he opening his eyes or moving at all?
He's breathing.
Okay, is he breathing normally, like his chest is rising and falling? He's not making any weird sounds?
Yeah, he's making a very exhale sound like...
Okay, if he's doing that, we need to start CPR, so I need you to get him flat on his back on the ground.
Okay.
Alex Cox had been struck down when blood clots wedged in his lungs. When his stepson found him, Alex had not only lost control of his bowels, but had also vomited. That, combined with his weight, made CPR difficult. Alex's wife, whom he had married less than 3 weeks previously, arrived just before the paramedics.
Alex. Alex. He's not breathing. No. No, he's too big.
Okay, just try to get him on his back so we can do chest compression.
My mother just got here.
Okay, ma'am, the paramedics are pulling up, but in the meantime, we need him to get flat on his back, and we need to give him chest compressions, okay?
Chest compression. Wait, but
Does she know how to do CPR?
yes, she knows how.
Okay.
How far are you?
We're pulling up out front right now, so they're grabbing their equipment and they're coming in.
Alex Cox died on December 12, 2019. Blood clots in his lungs combined with high blood pressure means that under any normal circumstances, this would be an open and shut case of natural death. But the body of Alex Cox is the sixth corpse with a connection to his sister, Lori Vallow. And for that reason, the police aren't so sure. In the past, our true crime profiles have focused on 911 calls that reveal, make, or break a case. But in the case of Alex Cox, the 911 call you just heard doesn't begin to tell the whole story. In this case, we have to go all the way back to 2006, when Alex's sister, Lori, married her fourth husband, Charles Vallow. Lori and Charles Vallow had a number of kids from previous marriages, but the two kids they were raising together were these ones. Lori's daughter Tylee and JJ, an adopted son born into Charles' extended family. If there was a warning sign that all was not well, it came when Lori's brother Alex Cox was arrested for aggravated assault on one of Lori's former husbands. Alex used a stun gun on Lori's ex, Joseph Ryan, in the August of 2007 and threatened to kill him. Alex claimed that it was because Ryan was threatening his sister. It was not the last time Alex Cox would resort to violence when he felt Lori was threatened. But aside from this incident, Lori and her new husband Charles Vallow appeared to have a happy marriage. By 2014, the family of four was living together on the Hawaiian islands of Kauai. Friends of Lori's say that she was a devoted mother, showing as much care and attention to the adopted and autistic JJ as she did to her biological daughter. Then, in 2015, Lori started obsessively reading the work of author Chad Daywell. Daywell was a minor celebrity in the world of preppers, people who believe the end of civilization as we know it is just around the corner. Chad connected with his followers through his books, his podcasts, and his speeches at prepper events.
And that's the message I really want to share, is that we can prepare ourselves to survive through these trials that are coming, and that's the whole reason you're here. I know that the Spirit has guided you and prompted you, that you have a role to play.
Chad and his wife Tammy Daybell had recently purchased a home in Idaho after Chad twice heard a voice telling him to move to the city of Rexburg. It was around this time that Lori began reading his books. In early 2017, Lori and Charles Vallow left Hawaii with Tylee and JJ, settling in as a family in Arizona. A year later, Lori's ex, Joseph Ryan, the one her brother had attacked 10 years previously, died. His death was ruled to be a heart attack, though authorities would later revisit this in light of what followed. In the fall of 2018, Lori attended an event for preppers organized by Preparing a People, an organization that says its mission is to help prepare the people of this earth for the second coming of Christ. It was at this event that she met her favorite author, Chad Daybell. Over the following months, Lori and Chad appeared on a number of podcasts together and began to exchange emails. On January 22, 2019, Lori received an email from Chad with the subject line, "Demon with a name, Nick Schneider." That month, while Charles was away on a business trip, Lori transferred $35,000 out of her husband's business account, funneling it into an unknown location. She also transferred 2,000 of his enterprise points to her personal account. When confronted by her husband, Lori told him that she was a god sent to carry out the work of 144,000 people who would survive the second coming of Christ. She also told Charles that she knew he wasn't her real husband. According to Lori, the real Charles was dead and his body was inhabited by a demon named Nick Schneider. Lori told her husband that she was planning to kill him and that she had an angel who would help her dispose of his body. Alarmed, Charles contacted the police and told officers that he was concerned about what Lori might do to the kids.
I'm not going to try. I'm not irrational or stupid or anything like that.
I just want her, at all.
I want her to get help.
Yeah.
She's my wife. I love her to death. Something's going on.
Okay.
And if she wants me gone, fine. I'll do all that stuff. I just don't want her hurt.
Okay.
and you don't want to hurt anybody else.
Charles petitioned a 72-hour hold and evaluation of Lori. Lori checked herself in for evaluation, but was discharged a few hours later. In early February, Charles filed for divorce from Lori. On the advice of his attorneys, he removed her as a beneficiary on his life insurance policy. However, after a few months, Charles decided to stop the divorce proceedings and try to make his marriage work. Lori was most likely grateful for the help. Tylee had recently become a teenager, and Lori described her as becoming difficult to deal with. "She's a zombie," Lori told her friend Melanie Gibb, complaining about Tylee's teenage moodiness. It was a phrase that would haunt Melanie later. Tylee, Lori repeated, became a zombie around age 13. Although Charles was trying to make his marriage to Lori work, her connection to Chad Daywell had changed her. Charles told friends that preparing a people was a cult, and that Lori was still saying he had been replaced with an evil spirit named Nick Schneider. In early 2019, Charles arrived at Lori's Arizona home to pick up JJ and Tylee. Also present at the house was Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Shortly after Charles arrived, 2 shots rang out, and another of Lori's husbands was dead.
Yes.
You need
Yes.
police or paramedics?
Both. I'm in police and an ambulance.
What's the emergency there?
I got in a fight with my brother-in-law and I shot him in self-defense.
Lori's brother claimed that Charles had become violent, though those who knew him protest strongly that Charles was a gentle soul. The 2 witnesses to the shooting, Lori and 15-year-old Tylee, backed up Alex's story. That evening, Lori threw a pool party at the scene of the crime. It was only after the death of her husband that Lori found out he had removed her as a beneficiary of his life insurance policy. She was outraged. Later, when questioned by police, this would be a topic she would return to again and again. In September of 2019, Lori, Tylee, and JJ moved to Rexburg, where they were close to Lori's friend and favorite author, Chad Daywell. Originally, Tylee had planned to stay behind in Arizona, but she ultimately decided she didn't want to be separated from her beloved little brother. Shortly after the move, Lori's brother also came to Rexburg. Alex Cox moved into the same housing complex as his sister, niece, and nephew. On September 8, 2019, phone records show that Tylee, JJ, Lori, and Alex took a family trip to Yellowstone National Park. Photos from that day show a happy family. They also record the last day that anyone outside of her family saw Tylee alive. 10 days later, Lori was visited by her friend Melanie Gibb. At the time, the 2 women were co-hosts of a religious podcast. During this visit, Lori complained that JJ was acting rambunctious and had knocked over a picture of Jesus. She said that JJ was acting like a zombie. As Gibb and Lori were re-recording a podcast episode, Alex Cox stopped by his sister's apartment holding a sleeping JJ in his arms. It was the last time Gibb or anyone outside the family saw JJ alive. Meanwhile, across town, Chad Daybell's wife Tammy was unloading groceries from her car when a man wearing a ski mask drove by and pointed what she assumed was a paintball gun at her. The gun didn't go off, and when Tammy yelled for her husband, the masked man drove away. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office believed the incident was a prank. 2 weeks later, police were called to the Daybell's house again. This time, Tammy Daybell was dead. Her husband, Chad, told police that she had gone to bed with a bad cough and never woken up. Although Tammy was only 49, the death was ruled to be natural and no autopsy was performed. Less than 2 weeks later, newly widowed Chad Daybell and newly widowed Lori Vallow were married in Hawaii. The wedding was paid for in part by the $430,000 Chad had received from his wife's insurance policy. JJ and Tylee are not in any of the wedding photos. That's because at that point, JJ and Tylee hadn't been seen in over a month. When speaking to acquaintances, Lori and Chad told a variety of stories. They told one acquaintance that Lori had no children. They told another that Tylee had died in 2017. At the request of JJ's paternal grandmother, police in Rexburg went to visit Lori and Chad once they were home from their honeymoon. Lori told police that JJ wasn't missing at all. He was staying with her friend Melanie in Arizona. When questioned by police, Melanie denied the story. She hadn't seen JJ in months. Tipped off that something was wrong, police returned to the home of Lori and Chad, only to find that the couple had abruptly left town. It was now December of 2019. Rexburg police publicly announced the disappearance of Tylee and JJ. While the public began to pray for the reappearance of the two children, Chad and Lori reappeared in Hawaii and refused to cooperate with the investigation. At this point, suspicious of the quick wedding that followed her death, police decided to exhume Tammy Daybell's body and perform an autopsy. While the results of the autopsy have yet to be made public, we do know that police have reclassified her death as suspicious. On December 30th, 2019, Rexburg police issued a news release saying that they strongly believe JJ and Tylee's lives to be in danger. The public began to demand answers from the two parents who walked the beaches of Hawaii while refusing to answer questions about the whereabouts of Tylee and JJ. Some private citizens even began posting the same question over and over in Amazon reviews of Chad Daybell's book, asking him, "Where are the children?" Finally, law enforcement located Chad and Lori on the Hawaiian island of Kauai and served them with a court order. Lori was required to physically produce Tylee and JJ to the Idaho Department of Welfare in Rexburg, Idaho, or to go to the Rexburg police within 5 days of being served with the order. When Lori did not show up to her court date, she was arrested on 2 counts of felony desertion of a child, resisting and obstructing an officer, solicitation of a crime, and contempt. She was extradited to Idaho, and Chad followed her there. While Lori was in prison, a search warrant was served on Chad's property. Here, the FBI found the answer to the question that had been haunting the state of Idaho. After nearly 9 months, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan had been found. Their bodies were uncovered in Chad Daywell's backyard, buried separately and weeks apart. Tylee was found in the Daywell Pet Cemetery, in a spot where Chad told the neighbors he had shot and buried a raccoon. JJ's body was found wrapped in duct tape. Evidence indicates that he may have been buried while still alive. Why were Tylee and JJ, 2 beloved and by all accounts good kids, murdered? The answer is found in the affidavit for Chad Daywell's arrest in June of 2020. According to that document, Chad's religious beliefs include the idea that some people on this earth are zombies, and that when Lori said her children had become zombies, she wasn't speaking about the moodiness and changes that come over all teenagers. She was talking about something much, much darker. But did Chad and Lori actually kill the kids, or did they send someone else to do it? Lori's ever-loyal brother Alex Cox was in Chad's yard on 2 separate nights that Tylee and JJ disappeared. Cell phone records place him there both times and in the middle of the night. At this point, we would love to tell you that Alex Cox spilled the beans and confessed all the details of the plot. But remember that 911 call from the beginning of the story. When the bodies of Tylee and JJ were discovered, Alex Cox was already dead.
That's correct.
Okay, what is the emergency?
I have a older male here named Alex. He just passed out here on my bathroom.
Okay, is he awake right now?
I think he's passed out.
Okay, you think he's unconscious?
Yes.
Authorities are relatively certain that Alex's death was natural, but they haven't stopped looking at the case, and you can't blame them. His corpse is just the latest in a long line left behind Lori and Chad. Lori's 3rd husband, Joseph Ryan, was beaten by her brother Alex and later died, apparently of natural causes. Lori's 4th husband, Charles, was shot twice by Alex, supposedly in self-defense. Chad's wife, Tammy, died in her bed, but not until after she had been shot at and Chad had bought a wedding ring for his new wife. Tylee and JJ, the brother and sister who couldn't bear to be separated, were buried together in Chad's backyard. That makes Alex Cox, Lori's brother, the 6th person to conveniently die in this story. With him, he takes away any chance we might have of proving the involvement of Lori and Chad in the deaths of the 2 children. Without Alex Cox, there's no way to prove that Lori and Chad participated or ordered the deaths of JJ and Tylee. However, both are currently defending themselves on charges of conspiracy to conceal evidence. Their case has been pushed back to at least the fall of 2021. That's where Beyond Crime leaves you for now, an unsatisfying ending to a grisly tale. There are still as many questions as there are answers. But for now, as terrible as the answer is, at least we know what happened to JJ and Tylee. And at least now they have been laid to rest and they are together as they always wanted to be. Thanks for watching Beyond Crime. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to support more true crime content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below.